In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up your single vessel brewing system in Brewfather using real measurements. How's it going? My name's Brian. I'd like to welcome you to another video. If this is your first time here and you'd like to learn more about electric brewing, see product reviews and tutorial videos just like this one, consider subscribing. And if you do, don't forget to click that bell so you won't miss a video when it comes out. Just a point of note, anything that I discuss, the Brewfather software and other things are located down in the description, so be sure to check that out. Let's jump into the video. All right, so coming into Brewfather, generally when you open up, you're gonna see recipes is your first tab or your first menu that comes up. We're gonna go into profiles, and then we're gonna go into equipment. And then we're going to add a profile because the brewing system that we're using today is not actually on the Brewfather program. And they do work on trying to add things as quickly as possible. The developers are generally all over anything. So I'm going to provide them with this information once I brew with this profile a couple times to add it to the system so that you don't have to actually manually add it. But we're going to use it today for adding the profile. And that system is a Spike Solo, by the way. So we're going to click Add Profile. And let me zoom in just a little bit here. And we'll take a look at what we need to do. All right, so we're going to name it first off. And I'm going to call it Spike Solo. And I think we'll just call it Spike Solo for now. Next up is the boil time, and we're going to leave that at 60 minutes. I will enter a little bit of a description here, but for now, just kind of a placeholder. I want to put 80% power, if I can type, for boil off. And then I'll put a couple other things in there once I get done doing all this. All right, so we want to look at the volumes, and by default, it is set to the kettle. I actually want to know how much is going into my fermenter. So I'm actually going to change that from kettle to fermenter. Now, the batch volume that we're going to be putting into the fermenters over here, and I actually like to target about 5.5 gallons in the fermenter. And one thing about the profiles that I've created, I get questions from people all the time about changing this or that or the other. I want you to change the profile, quite honestly, to match whatever your conditions are. So, you know, my profiles are not set in stone. I want to give you a really good starting place, but then you're gonna need to take some good notes and brew a couple times. When you brew, take some good notes, and then you can adjust the profile to fit your environment, your equipment, and all that type of thing. If you stay till the end of the video, I'll show you a couple tips on what to change and what not to change or what not to do. So stick around for that. So we're gonna go with a 5.5 gallon batch volume. And so after that, we come to the calculate boil volume, which we want to do. Now the boil off rate, or gallons per hour, I actually filled up the Spike Solo up to 10 gallons. And you want to take these measurements either hot or cold. So if you're going to take these measurements cold, you're going to need to do a boil and then let it cool off completely. If you're doing it hot, then what I did was actually filled it up with 10 gallons and then brought it up to near boil. Once it got up to about 200 degrees, that was when I actually drained a little bit off because of expansion. Water will expand as it gets hot. So I took a little bit off to get it right at the 10 gallon mark. Then I started the timer and boiled for an hour. And the boil off rate that I came up with on the Spike Solo is 1.75 gallons per hour. So that's quite a bit actually. Now we come to the trub and the chiller loss, and this is kind of one of those places where it's subjective to what you're doing. And I will tell you that just the amount of liquid that the dip tube will pick up in the Spike Solo system, it will drain all the way down to leaving a half a gallon behind. Now how I did that was I put a hose on the outlet for the kettle and then drained all of the liquid all the way down. And you want to have a hose on there because of the fact that it creates a little bit of a siphon, and it'll actually pull all of the liquid that it possibly can out. If you just do it right off of the spigot, it's going to actually stop pulling out before it gets everything drained. So that's just a little tip on that. So once I did that, it actually came up with a half a gallon. And the way that I do that is actually will weigh the water. So whenever I fill up the kettle, I'll weigh the water out, and water is approximately 8.34 pounds per gallon. And so my scale actually measures 8.35, so I did that. And this is also a good time if you're setting up your software for your equipment to check your gradation marks and make sure that your gallons and everything are showing correctly. Be sure that when you're filling your kettle that you make a checkoff sheet, because it's really easy to lose your place on how much water you've got in there. So do that. I have one with lines to make notes. So what I did was I drained it all the way down, took what was left over, poured it into a pitcher and measured it, and we're roughly right about a half a gallon. So it was just a little bit over 4 pounds. So we're going to go with a half a gallon for that mark right there. Now for the mash tun dead space, what I did with that was I measured my water, filled it up. When I got up to 4 gallons, I thought that was pretty close to the amount that was going to be underneath of the basket. So I put the basket in, and sure enough, the basket was actually slightly submerged in water. So I actually drained off some of that water until it was just barely touching the bottom of the basket. And the amount that I came up with for the dead space underneath of the basket was 3.5 gallons. So we'll put that number in there. There is no mash tun loss really, because of the fact that we're draining everything right into the kettle. We're not doing any kind of a HLT dead space. We're not doing an HLT, so there's nothing with that. Now, if you're brewing a beer that has a lot of hops in it or something like that, this fermenter loss is going to be the area where you can make some adjustments. If you're going to be doing a bunch of dry hopping that's going to be left behind, you can certainly add, half a gallon, however much you think you're going to need to make up the difference between the beer you can actually remove from the fermenter versus how much is absorbed in the hops and everything. All right, so moving along, we're going to be looking at the Brewhouse Efficiency. I'm going to leave that at 64.4% because a mash efficiency of about 70 is a pretty good place to start, especially with a no sparge type system. We're going to get that here in just a second. But leave the Brewhouse Efficiency where it's at, and as you brew with it, if you find that you're actually getting a little bit better efficiency, you can change that. Hop utilization, we're going to leave that at 100%, and we're going to leave the Aroma Hop Utilization at 18%. Hop stand temperature looks fine to me. I don't see any issues with that. If you want to put in, if you're going to do a whirlpool, this will be where you put in how long you want that whirlpool to be. That way the system can calculate the IBUs and the utilization. Altitude adjustment, if you are way above sea level or at sea level, you may want to adjust this. I know just from experience that at my altitude, my boil temperature is about 210 degrees. So I don't even mess with that. The grain absorption rate, I'm going to leave that as is. No problem with that. The water to grain ratio, we're going to leave that as well because of the fact that this is a no sparge system, and it's actually, you're going to be putting the full volume of water in there. So the method that I like to use is going to be no sparge, and then that's going to take all the other measurements basically out of it, and we're just going to be working on a water based on how much grain versus what the final product you want is. So basically the system is just going to be saying add all this water but deduct this much for the grain that is absorbing the liquid. We don't need a sparge water reminder because of the fact that we're not sparging at all. Now include the grain volume in the mash limits. Now I actually did go ahead and fill up the Solo system all the way up to probably within 1.5 inches or so of the top of the basket. And what I came up with on that, which I'm going to put in the number in the figure here, is 19 gallons. So basically 19 gallons including your grain is going to be pretty much the limit of the volume of this vessel. It's going to give you a little bit of wiggle room, but that's pretty much what the max is going to be. Now the Spike Solo kettle, the 20-gallon system, has a little bit more than a 20-gallon kettle. So you have a little bit of room there, but I'm just, I'm kind of being a little bit on the safe side. You can increase that number a little bit if you want. Now, I don't have an exact minimum, but I'm going to say probably about 6 gallons is going to be our minimum batch size, because that's right around the area that it looked to be at when I was doing a 5-gallon batch. Now, the sparge water limits, we're not worried about that at all. Overflow target, so if you have a little bit of, let's say your recipe is you're doing a lot of grain and you're adding a ton of grain and a bunch of water, and the system can't compensate for the amount of volume that the vessel will hold, it will actually calculate a top-up boil volume for you. So basically, like if you're exceeding 19 gallons with your grain and your water, it'll probably set aside a little bit of space or a little bit of water for a top up before you boil. So that's what that's for. You just leave that on there as it is. We're not worried about an HLT water limit. We do want to calculate the strike temperature. Now, because of the fact that this is a all-in-one system and we're actually heating up the basket and the kettle and everything all at the same time, we don't have to worry about any of that at all. It just should work just fine, and it'll calculate the temperature of your strike water based on your grain. Now you will need to adjust the grain temperature and the room temperature to match whatever your conditions are, and then it can give you a pretty spot on adjustment for your mash in temperature. If you, for some reason, if you're doing a single vessel system and you're going to do, let's say you're going to heat up the water and you're going to drop in the basket or whatever, there's actually a tool in the software that will allow you to figure out what the drop is, you know, with the basket cold and all that stuff. So you can consult the software for that. But pretty much that is about it as far as that goes. Now I will tell you that if for some reason you are finding that when you're doing your boil, this is your bonus tips. If you're doing your boil and you find that, you know, you're using a lot of hops, or, you know, you're having a lot of trub in the bottom of the kettle and you're not getting a trub-free transfer, or you're getting a lot of trub trying to make your volume in your fermenter, you can certainly increase this number, the trub and chiller loss. That would be a place that I would go first, would be to do that. Likewise, if you're having an issue with not getting your full volume out of your fermenter because you're doing a lot of dry hopping or something like that, you would want to change your fermenter loss. One thing I would stress, highly stress with doing any kind of profile adjustment, is do one thing. Don't change more than one item at a time. Just change one thing, do a brew, see what happens, make your notes, make your adjustments, and then keep going from there. But don't make more than one adjustment at a time. If you found the video helpful and you enjoyed it, be sure to hit the like button, share it out there with anybody that is wanting to know how to set up a Brewfather profile. This has been Brian for Short Circuited Brewers. We'll see you on the next video.